Remember that record that you bought me like 2 years ago? Well, I just remembered that it's sitting in the closet. So I called you up just to tell you I've been meaning to listen to that. I've been meaning to listen to that. Why don't you come over and talk about it? Ooh. Why don't you come over and talk about it?
There's an online community I'm a part of. It's an old forum. It's called Boxden, BXDEN, and I'm in that community. You know what I mean? Like I'm in it. Like I use my name and I talk to real people. You know what I'm saying? And there's all kinds of crazy people in that forum, but there's also a lot of really good conversations. So you can even do the same thing, even digitally. You have the option.
Yeah.
Find an online place and be a real person there. At least one.
Show up.
Yeah.
There's tons where I'm not a real person now.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really say anything in them, but I'm lurking. I could just, you know
Gotta
what I'm
have the
saying?
burner.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What's the company man doing in r/Peppa Pig? Like,
Right. What is the company man doing in there now that I think about it?
But hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. Welcome to I've Been Meaning to Listen to That, the podcast where we go through albums we've been meaning to listen to and use it as a conduit to learn about each other and our guests. I'm Andrew Ambrose Lee.
I'm Stenley Philippe.
And I'm Jon Butts.
And this is what a special episode here. He's one of the pioneers of long-form hip-hop journalism in the internet age. Please welcome the host of It's All Happening with Justin Hunte, Justin Hunte.
Yay!
10 second applause.
Thank you.
4,
That's great.
6, 7, 8, 9.
That's
10. Legend.
Yeah, that's definitely what I do when I'm holding down the little pad on the little sound effects board. I'm like counting in my head. It's very rarely actually 9 seconds. I get impatient. I'm like, okay, 7.5 feels like 9. We're gonna keep going.
1 second applause.
There you go.
But it's what an honor. I love your show. I was like, I'm a young buck, so I was like introduced to your show during the beef. But yeah, for those who might not know, like don't have the privilege of knowing, what's your show? What's It's All Happening?
It's called It's All Happening with Justin Hunte, and it's a look at life through the lens of hip hop. So I'll cover, different news stories and topics in a reactionary style. Some are just straight reactions. Some I label as news, even though it's more reactionary news, just because of the elements that are at play, whatever the conversation is particularly. And so I've truthfully recently pivoted to this style more after the battle, because that battle was going too fast, man. I'm a think piece guy. Right. I'm a think piece guy. I'm an editorial guy. I'm a long form deep dive guy. And when you get to, you're dropping 4 tracks in 5 hours, basically, it felt like, and you want to be a part of the conversation. You can't sit there. At least I couldn't sit there and formulate thoughts and not be a part of such a historic moment. And so that's where this style of show that's showing up that I'm doing now sort of originated. I've been developing a show like this for a long time, but primarily most of my channel is deep dives into, different conversations under the same banner, life through the lens of hip hop. So I look at like, okay, we've got the end of net neutrality. What does that mean for Black rappers? Right. If Black people tend to not have money the same, or Black people or at-risk populations tend to not have the same access. And we're putting a premium on access to the internet. What does that mean for the internet era of music? Or I'll look at, whether or not Drake is Black excellence, and do it, which is a line from one of his songs that I did long form, break down into it. Or take a Kendrick Lamar song like XXX and apply it to things he says in the song to characteristics of the millennial generation, So I have a lot of experience in the news space and the editorial space, the news space, running Hip Hop DX at different point in my career, editorially, just because that's really my passion in the first place. So life through the lens of hip hop sort of fuses all of these different elements and looks at all the tentacles of the music of our generation. So that's what I have a passion to do every day.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and that's just also like because like this is like a newer format for you. Like I was like watching you develop it in real time, and like you were calling them reps themselves, and like,
Right.
it was so cool to like see you get better and better and like more
Yeah.
like concise and with your sensibility, while also like maintaining like the humor and like the rhetorical trick of like repeating the drops and stuff like that.
Right.
It's really great. So
I
love it.
appreciate it. Yeah. I mean, you can go look at some of those early ones. I hadn't even figured out the technology yet. You know what I mean? Like those, there's like a milky background when I'm trying to figure out how to put myself in the reaction and not just my voice. But, you know, nothing starts off dope, you know, so.
But yeah, let's talk about Tupac. Like this is a Tupac episode. Our first Tupac episode on the show. It's on the album All Eyez On Me. It's one of the first hip hop double albums. Yeah, before we get started, like what is your history with to the board? What is your history with Tupac? What is your history?
Well, we went to high school together. No, I'm joking.
Oh, what?
That put me in a different age bracket. But there's you know, Tupac was one of those people who was kind of omnipresent when I look back and, you know, over the course of my life. You know, I think the first time I ever heard Tupac was I Get Around and Brenda's Got a Baby and that era, those two projects. My older cousins, you know, my older cousins Anthony and my older cousin Shaw, like, you know, they were the arbiters of everything that's cool. And my family, on my mom, on that side of the family, we're from Rocky Mount, North Carolina. So there's a whole ton of us down there. And like that was the plantation where we were slaves. And then we have this house that we've had like forever. So all of us would go to Rocky Mount, North Carolina every summer for family reunion. And like people would take buses from different cities. It'd be like hundreds of us out there. And, you know, one summer I'm there, I'm like 9 or 8 years old or something. And my cousin Anthony is like, I Get Around. We're doing I Get Around all day. We play it like, you know, we just wait to see the video come on. And, you know, that era of Tupac is where I first, you know, interacted with his music. I love that song. I mean, both those songs are really great. But like, over time, you just start seeing him all over the place, right? You start seeing him, he was on a different world, you know, he was acting. And so from that entry point, I just sort of followed his music because he was such a titan of art and also of the media at the same time. With this particular album, my mom was like a huge fan of this project. And there was a buildup to when this album dropped because he was in jail for 18 months, I think, right before it. And still somehow in the slow 90s analog media machine, I felt like I saw Tupac every day. I felt like every day Tupac was somewhere, even though he was in jail, right? And so when this album dropped and he was going to be with Death Row, it was a big, big deal. And so my mom took me to the store. and the same day this album dropped, the Fugees album, the score came out.
Yeah.
And so my mom and I would go CD shopping together whenever there were CDs. And so I wanted both albums. And so how did this go? I wanted both albums, but I could only pick one album. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna trick my mom. I'm gonna get this Tupac album because it's a double disc. That's like getting 2 discs at once, right? I was like, it's gonna be 2. So she gonna go, no. She knew, but like, so I got that CD. And then she ended up getting the score. So I ended up getting both the CDs that I wanted at the same time. So, you know, I would have to say Tupac has a family connection. So that's really how how I was introduced to his music and him as a person and this project specifically.
Incredible. That's so dope. Like, what about you, Stenley? What's your history of Tupac?
Yeah, I was trying to think about how I want to describe this because growing up, so my older brother was definitely more of the East Coast rap, and I growing up, I guess because he was that, I really loved West Coast rap. So I love old Snoop, obviously old Dre, like Dove Shack, like was like my jam back in the summertime description. It was exactly what we felt when we were in Toronto growing up in a very short summer period of time. But
oh, word, okay.
But it was like really cool to hear that sound, and it felt like the cookout. It felt like a barbecue. It felt like that good feeling. So I really loved like old school, I guess like 90s West Coast. But then Big dropped. And then when Biggie dropped, you're just kind of like, well, this is the guy, you know? And so anything that was contrary to him felt like a negative. So I didn't really gravitate towards Pac, except for like a couple of tracks here and there. You know, like obviously Keep Your Head Up is like an all-time classic. Dear Mama, all-time classic. But I didn't really gravitate towards this album. Like I didn't really love this album as much or listen to as much as I think I would have in today's era. And then we were just talking, Justin, before you came on, about the Source Awards, and that also was almost like you had to pick a side, you know. And I'm sure we'll get into the East Coast, West Coast, but that moment where, you know, Snoop is declaring how there was no love for him in the West Coast in New York, you're kind of like, oh shit, like do I have to go against all of Death Row in order to represent the music that you're listening to? You know what I mean? Like,
right.
So anyway, so it's kind of conflicting. Never really like appreciate Pac as much until he died, obviously, and then you just kind of realize like Tupac was the voice of a generation. I think that's the best way for me to describe it. Is I never thought musically he was better than Big, but culturally he was bigger than anybody else, and I think he may still be to this day. So that's my introduction to my Tupac-ness of it all.
Incredible. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think he's still bigger culturally than probably everybody but Kanye. You know, like, I mean, you can make an argument he's still one of the 5 most influential people of the past 40 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I would say like in this album, you know, so I've never heard this album before. I don't think I've consciously heard a Tupac song aside from California Love, which is wild. Like when ridiculous, I'm like almost 30 years old, and like it's gone to that point where I somehow have not. It's like not seeing Star Wars or something. But like the framing I heard from people, I think Stenley said this, is like he was Kanye before Kanye. He was, and obviously the beef was all about Tupac's legacy, and like you kind of see like if you like now it's super clear, but like I just had like the etching of an idea back then of just like, oh, you see like the legacy splitting off into Kanye, into Tupac, into Kendrick, and into Drake a little bit. I'm just like Drake is like the archetype of Tupac, but like he uses his influence for evil basically, and then like you know, like Kanye's a performance artist.
Wait, are all y'all in Toronto or just Stanley in Toronto?
Yeah, no, I think I'm the only Canadian here, and you know what, I can admit it that Drake lost. Got crushed.
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's. I don't know if that was
all right.
You know, I don't know if you get
a question
for that or anything. I could admit the Niners haven't won a Super Bowl since Joe Montana or since Steve Young.
You know? Fair. We're speaking the same language. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like the obviously like Kendrick with like the message or like the legacy of like trying to like unify the West Coast in a way, try to like move in a more positive like Black culture into a more positive direction, and then Kanye and the I don't give a fuck attitude to say whatever I want type of thing, like this like Gemini. Is Tupac a Gemini? Is like
they're both. I think all three of them. All three of them.
Yeah, exactly. I think Drake's a Scorpio, but like like
well, Kendrick, Kanye, and Pac.
Yeah. So like the idea of so that was my framing. I kind of like had a idea of him from culture, of just the first time I heard of him was like from The Simpsons, where like the joke was it would like Tupac at a Christmas special, and it was so funny that Tupac had a Christmas special or something because he was like so like scary and stuff. And then like I did really like his verse on Tailor Made Freestyle. I thought that was really good.
I was just talking to King. I was talking to King Los about this today. I'm like, yo, man, I feel like I'm the only one, definitely on the West Coast, but only one on the planet who really likes Tailor Made Freestyle. I thought Drake did a very good job of saying what I feel like. Everything he said that Pac on that song, I can see Pac saying.
Kendrick, we need you. Just like,
there's that line that trips me out all the time where he goes, he said, They said the spirit of Machiavelli is alive. It hit her under 5'5", so it's got to be you. I die all the time at that. I'm like, it's a good song to me. And it's a real Dr. Dre beat. It feels like something Pac and Snoop would hop on.
I like that he listens to the Joe Budden podcast. He's a big fan. He's just like, he loves Ish and all those fellas. But what about you, John? What's your history of Tupac?
Kind of similar to Justin and Stenley, and how that sort of osmosis happens through family. Like, my dad was a big hip hop fan, and I feel like I talked about this maybe on the Nas episode. And I just have so many memories of him being like, "Well, this album came out. I'm about to listen to it. I shouldn't be playing this right now, but forget all the cussing." So I definitely was listening to some Pac growing up, but also like, I had access to cable, so the media personification of Tupac was always there too, that sort of ubiquity. And just watching all of his music videos and just getting him through that. And I honestly want to say California Love had a making the video on MTV. So even got to see like the behind the scenes process as like I don't know how old I was. I was like 6 or something, young, but still, taking in the media persona of Tupac. And I was too young for his movies at that time, but I think all of the singles I was a fan of even at that age. And I remember I didn't own this album at that age, but when I got into high school, I bought All Eyez On Me myself when I started getting my own money. And but I also was really obsessed with producers and productions, and obviously like the linear notes. I had this old like wooden console that my TV like sat on, and I'd like etched like Johnny J and like Daz the Dillinger and like DJ Quick into it, just to be like, these are the producers that cultivated the sound that I love, just like having.
You sounded like a cool 9-year-old.
1 second applause.
So
that's the wrong button. 1 second applause. There you go.
But yeah, Pac was always somebody that I feel like when we talk about that East Coast and West Coast split, I feel like I always split West Coast, because whether you're debating on who's the better rapper, I think just that West Coast sound appealed to me a little bit more. There was something a little bit more laid back in the delivery and the production that I feel like Dre pioneered to some degree, and DJ Quick as well. Just resonated with me. And even across this album, we'll get into it, just like hearing that G-Funk sine wave synthesizer across the project. It's just like, ooh, this is what the West Coast is all about. I'm here for it. So yeah, Pac's always been around. And as Justin was saying, I still see how people try to emulate what he was, like the archetype that he kind of portrayed. Even as you can talk about somebody like, whether you like him or hate him, like Playboy Cardi, I feel like very much so has like a persona of like bucking the media and like, I don't give a fuck and I'm in my own lane. And Pac carved out his own lane in a way that I feel like a lot of his contemporaries did not. So yeah, big fan of Pac.
It's wild how like your setting can dictate your output. Like I think the West Coast, because it's sunny out there, that there's almost this joyfulness, even though there's a lot of gangbanging culture, the struggle, obviously police brutality. Like there's so many things that are laced into the lyrics and into the culture, but the sounded way more fun as a kid than the East Coast, like almost like those really hard drums and like that nighttime Timberland boots. Like you're actually grinding on the East Coast, and so it's hard to go to a party and just listen to like some Mobb Deep, and not feel like you're just like in your trench coat, like hidden. When you hear like Summertime in the LBC or To Live and Die in LA. Like you just feel like you're having the best time of your life, no matter what's happening around you. You know what I mean? Like there's.
Yeah, I think the East Coast sounds like alleys and hallways and
Yes.
staircases. You know, I
Yes.
feel like they use a lot of sounds that sound like the architecture, you know, like to sound like
Oh shit.
high-rise project buildings or buildings in general, you know, and West Coast music sounds like a ride, like you're driving, you know, and it feels, you know, because car culture is so huge here, right? So public transportation barely, I mean, you got buses, but like even that, you're riding, you know, you're not taking a subway and things like that. So I think, you know, how people live dictates the sounds that become popular in a lot of regions. I mean, Toronto has a very cold sound to it. I mean, I think Toronto takes a lot from New York, but let's say take the OVO sound. It's like it's like cold, it's chilling almost from a production standpoint. So I think there's something to what you're saying, Joe.
And then I just want to quickly add on to that, because the reason why Big hit so hard is because he was clearly very East Coast, but he felt like the West Coast. You know, like he was so smooth and he almost brought light. I mean, him and can we say Puff? Like, can we talk about Puff? But Puffy like recrafted. But you know what I mean? Like Puffy crafted a sound through his sampling that, like, he was like, yo, we're gonna dance on the East Coast. Yeah. You know, we're gonna be all up in the videos, all up in the records, dancing. You know, like he brought that. And so then all of a sudden you felt like on the East Coast, you can still have fun too. You know, and that almost allowed us to say like, oh, we're actually like, we're good out here. We don't need to run to the Ice Cubes of it all in order to maybe have a bit more of a, or the Dr. Dre sound, a bit more of a lighter type of output.
Yeah, and I think, you know, a lot of that comes from how everybody was chasing Dr. Dre as an engineer.
Yes.
Like, as an engineer, he was able to get more out of his speakers than pretty much everyone else. Like even Rap A Lot Records, Jay Prince always tells this story about how he wouldn't heard The Chronic or whatever when it first came out. And he came back and he was like, Mike Dean, why do our records not sound like that? We need our records to sound like that, you know? And so Biggie, I mean, Diddy pulled from that. And so like Biggie has a mix, to me, when I listen to his records, like a lot of them do sound like very cold, very stairwell, alley-driven New York type production. But then when it came to his hits, it was very much sample-based in a more West Coast fashion. That like Juicy could have been made in California.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, so I think that Dr. Dre was driving everything sonically, and Diddy did pull a lot from Diddy, Rap A Lot. Pretty much everybody was trying to get the sound out of their speakers like Dr. Dre. That's why Dr. Dre has Beats headphones now. You know what I mean? So
right.
The other like framing of this episode is like, this is when I was a kid, I saw this album cover all the time. I saw this album cover in some of your old videos as well, like just like on the wall. You said that this album is like one of your favorites of all time. All Eyez On Me. That is, broadly speaking, what would you say is the scope and the impact and the legacy, and what is it about him that's so like special and resonates with folks?
Well, this album did a lot of things that hadn't happened. Like, first of all, this came out. This is the first thing Pac worked on when he got out of jail. He was in jail for 18 months. He found out he was getting out of jail 4 weeks before the rest of the world. And so while he's in prison, he's like sketching this out, like what he wants to do. Right. And so he gets out of jail, Clinton Correctional in New York, and he gets on a jet with Suge Knight or whoever. They fly straight to the studio. And one of the things he was trying to do was break the world record, the Guinness Book of World Record for creating the most songs in the shortest period of time.
Wow.
So like,
that explains a lot.
That does.
Right. That really lets you know. They ended up not breaking the record. But when he, you know, you could imagine, you know, he has always maintained that he did not commit the crime that sent him to jail, that he didn't, you know, assault a woman. I'm not sure how deep you guys want to go into that, but he always maintained that he did not commit that crime. Right. So now he's in prison for 18 months and, you know, he is dealing with the fact that he's in there for something he firmly believes he didn't do. And he's watching, you know, things happening on the outside. So when you hear this album, as opposed to Me Against the World right before it, which was more, in my opinion, more of a well-rounded album, This one is very antagonistic. Like the first song is, I won't deny it, I'm a straight rider, you don't want to fuck with me, right? That's the first thing you hear from Tupac. And so this album, doesn't have, it doesn't have like, some of the more conscious elements that were more prolific or were more present on his previous projects. Like this one is like, we partying, I'm riding on my enemies. You know what I'm saying? Like, my homie just died, you know what I mean? And so that energy behind it was a detour from what people expected from Tupac at that point in time. Like a lot of the fans loved it. It was one of the most popular albums of all time. It's Diamond now. I think it was 5 million within the first few years it came out. But critically, there was a lot of people who were kind of like, yo, man, what you do? You go to the West Coast now, all of a sudden, now in the West Coast, now it's all guns blazing and all this stuff. Now it's all this energy. And so there was a perception that had more to do with being on death row, where a lot of the sonics, or at least the things he's talking about on the album and the aggression that's in this album came from. But a lot of it also had to do with him being in jail for a crime he didn't believe he committed, and he was very upset about that, right? And so there's a conversation. Was this an article? I think it was an article. Which interview was this? Someone asked him, it was like, "Yo, man, are you just flipping the script because you're on death row now?" He's like, "Well, this one's also for Suge, right?" And so Suge Knight's the one that bailed him out of jail, and that is the death row energy. So I think it's a marriage. It's a marriage of the two perspectives, right? It's like, he was really upset sitting down for 18 months. And also, this is what this label does. And as an output of a product, it was immediately impactful. You know what I mean? And I personally loved it because I didn't think about the world that way when this album came out. And as time has gone on and I listen to this album now, like as a more mature person, I still love this album because of all the things that it's doing on that album. It taps into, for me personally, a lot of energy and and anger and parties and lighter moments that, are also a part of life. For it to be a double disc and not to have as many conscious moments resonated differently with in 1996, when this dropped. Was it? Yeah, 1996 when it dropped for a lot of people in the media and certain fans. But you can't deny the success of the project and how big these songs were. And it became the blueprint for how to sell albums. You had, was it I Got My Mind Made Up? What's the song called? It's called
Method Man and Redman.
Right. So you got Method Man and Redman. So you've got New York, quintessential New York rappers spitting real bars on this album. You know what I mean? You still got George Clinton on here with the G-Funk stuff. You've got the biggest guys on the West Coast from LA to the Bay on the album at the same time. So we would see, by the time Biggie's double disc comes out, he does the same thing, but he adds the South and he adds the Midwest, right? Biggie had 112 and all those guys from Atlanta on his project. He also had Bone Thugs and Harmony on his album. So, marrying for this album to be that big, All Eyez on Me, there's a lot of things that happened on there that were impactful just from how albums were put together at the time.
And yeah, how would you, I guess like a question is like, how would you reconcile like so I never listened to Tupac before, but I listened to this album. I was wanting conscious moments, like, because you had this legacy.
There's not a lot of them.
Yeah, he had this legacy.
Not a lot of them.
Like super revolution. You listen to the interviews. He's like super, like, as the kids call him, woke. He's like super, like, but he's like super, like, socialist. He's super like conscious, like, and I listened to Brenda's Got a Baby. I listened to like Trapped. I listened to Dear Mama. I listened to these songs. I'm like, this is a generational artist. And like, and then I listened to this and like, where's Dear Mama? Where's the fact that I'm spending so much time with him and we're not getting any of those, very few of those moments. And even like the moments that we get are very brief and like they're more just like he's empathetic, he's more sensitive than like I'm pointing out what society is like, and like So how do you reconcile these two sides? Like,
I don't. I appreciate it for what it is. The dude was in jail for 18 months, felt like he didn't commit the crime, and also signed to Death Row Records. Okay.
Yes.
Like, I feel like people, I think that when I think about balance, for example, let's say that, right? When I think about balance, I don't necessarily think about balance within the same project as being the only way to look at balance, right? Like, I think you can have a conscious album and then have something that's more rugged. You're still offering balance, even if it's in two completely compartmentalized listens, right? So if I want more balance, I just go listen to the other Tupacs, right? But so I don't try to reconcile them. I just kind of enjoy it and think about it, because, like, truthfully, that is a very outlier situation to be in. You're in jail for a crime you didn't feel like you committed, and you also got shot by these other guys from your town in New York, and like, and no one's getting arrested over there, and like, like the whole thing just. I'm pretty sure I would get out of jail and be like, only God can judge me. Now what? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So I just think of it as looking at it I look at it from that point of view. Now, there are tracks on here. I don't want people who haven't heard this project to think that he's not saying anything more conscious, right? You still have, oh, wait, where's that? You still have, look how hard it is to find this. I Ain't Mad at You. You still have I Ain't Mad at You on here. You got Shorty Wanna Be a Thug on here. Life Goes On. Yeah, Life Goes On is one too. But like, to Andrew's point, like those are more focused on like a particular person over like the plight we're all experiencing, which is something Tupac is also really good at capturing.
Yeah, I think being a Gemini requires you to go to the extremes. And so if you are, and I think Tupac, because of his sensibility, was almost like trying to protect himself as much as possible. And so when he's in the most vulnerable state and the whole world is judging him, literally putting him in prison, and if he feels like he's not there for any valid reason, then that's the only reaction you can have. It's either to sink or to swim. And for him, swimming with Suge means doing stuff like this. And I hate myself for always bringing up Kanye now, but like this sounds like Yeezus to me, right? Like Yeezus was just like, you know what? I'm trying so hard to break through somewhere. And not that Ye was in jail, but he was in creative jail. And so he's just like, well, fuck you all. You think you want another 808s or another good life? Well, I'm going to give you the worst sound you could ever have in your life to start this album, right? That like, So what's Pac's reaction to being in jail? It's the greatest, I think, the greatest starting like 30 seconds in maybe hip hop history. Right? Like it's just pure, like, exactly what he's saying. I won't deny it. You know what? I'm done denying this shit. I'm a straight rider. You ain't gonna fuck with me.
Right.
You can't fuck with me. And so now what? And here's 2+ hours of me saying you can't fuck with me, which is
right.
Which could be good and also bad, but you know what I mean? Like just that attempt is very much what a Gemini does,
I'd be saying that shit too if I got shot 5 times, lived, and got put in jail. Like that's the only order of operations in this scenario.
Exactly.
There's also like first of all, there's a parallel to like the other Kanye album, Graduation. It was just like I did my like 2 conscious albums, and now I'm gonna like have fun and like all that stuff. Like I'm out of jail, I'm like celebrating, partying, and stuff like that. There's also like a parallel to Damn, where to Pimp a Butterfly is such this generational statement of like, this is like how we heal the world. This is how we fix everything. And like, it didn't work. And then Damn is like, what about my feelings? What about me? I've been sitting in prison this whole time. And like, what about me? Like, it's like, so I think he needed to get this off his chest. And I don't know. I think he suspected he might die, but I don't think he knew for sure, like he was like just trying to turn as much music out. Like maybe it would have like turned to like the light. Maybe it would have been more negative. Maybe it would have been more in this like West Coast death row direction.
I got to give a plug to my man, Michael Namikis. He's an incredible journalist. I believe he's the foremost authority on Tupac. He used to write for Hip Hop DX. We became we added him he joined the freelance staff because one of our writers took a Reddit post he made about a Tupac exhibit and wrote a story off of it. And it was like, why don't we just get the guy who wrote the story? Why are we doing that? Like, so he made an incredible book. It's called The Tupac Encyclopedia Volume 1. Look how thick this is. Right?
Wow.
Look how thick this is. So this is Volume 1 of everything to know about Tupac. And he goes
Shout
into
out to Reddit.
Right. So Michael Namikis goes into great detail about Tupac and his life. Like he's dedicated his life to studying Pac, and he's a tremendous writer. And so to your
can
point,
I just quickly ask you, did Michael go to jail for 18 months and come out and say, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to write the most I can write about Pac and then drop volume 1, and I'm assuming there's a volume 2. Is that what happened to Michael?
Unfortunately not. You know, Michael's a nice, warm-hearted family man. So he was very far away from prison as far as I know.
Awesome.
But to your point, in this book, Michael talks about that too, about how Tupac literally did not think he was going to be around very long. And so there was some quotes in here from different news sources and things around this topic, around this album that said that. They were like, why are you trying to break the record for the most songs? What are you doing? Why are you moving so fast? You're taking up all the studio rooms all the rooms in the studio. No one else can record anything. He's like, I'm not going to be here long.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that what you said is right in line, you know, and he always had a fatalistic energy to him. And, you know, there's a lot of fatalism in this conversation. So, you know, you get out of jail, you got to get it all off your chest. All right, let's go sell all the records real quick. If I do this double disc, I'll get out this deal faster. So I get back to being myself and bringing the community together. Truthfully, it is to disc, right? And so I was always more of a fan of disc 1 than disc 2.
Yeah.
And I feel like disc 1 had more consequence. Disc 2, to me, really did feel like we're just stunting and partying. And as a middle schooler, elementary schooler, however old I was when this came out, playing Super Mario World, listening to this CD, you know.
The perfect soundtrack.
You know, disc 1 was the one that grabbed me first. You know, I've listened to this album so many times over the course of my life. But like the first half does a great job of bringing in topics for me at that age when I first heard this album that really opened my mind to things in a different kind of way. Like when he's like, Dolores Tucker, you's a motherfucker. Instead of trying to help a hitter, you destroy your brother. Worse than the other Bill Clinton, Mr. Bob Dole. You too old to understand the way the game sold. Like, as a kid listening to that, I'm not thinking necessarily about the connection between, you know, a black congresswoman and a white president and just having on our community in the same way. You know, like these are brand new thoughts for me at that point in time. So it's not like the album is void of like context or things like that. It's just angry about it. You know what I mean? It's not as, you know, it's not as welcoming of an introduction to these conversations because he truly is bombing on his enemies all throughout this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Then those like ideas become seeds for when you're growing up and kind of being able to reckon with what he was talking about. I feel like you always find that when revisiting an album, it's like, oh, I didn't really understand what he's getting at. But now that I've been voting in, you know, for presidential elections, I understand the connectivity between what's happened on the ground and what's happening in these offices.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's other things too that over the course of my life sound differently, even though I have a better understanding of the circumstances. Like on Ambitious as a Rider, he says, fuck my adversary, what do you say? Fuck my adversary, blast, saw my adversary blast on sight, and fuck your boyfriend, bitch, I want some ass tonight. Now, that doesn't sound like a guy who, you know, considering his charges and why he went to jail, you know, like, that does sound like something someone who might have committed that crime would say.
Right.
Fuck your boyfriend, bitch, I want some ass tonight. You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't, you know, it hits differently in 2020, whatever. 20 teens post Me Too, that hits very differently, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think also you can just get a glimpse of, but that's what I mean when I say like his frame of mind, his perspective, coming out of jail, sitting down for 18 months for a crime he didn't believe he committed. Mm-hmm. You know, there isn't, that's he feels like his community truthfully has done him wrong. He has spent so much time, on previous albums and other activities in his life trying to bring people together. And where did that get him? It got him shot and it got him in jail, so I can understand the anger.
Yeah, I think we can get into themes now a little bit. Like, we've been talking broadly about themes already, but like, is there anything else like Stenley and Jon that you want to like add in, like drop in there?
I think we could extrapolate the knowing or not knowing that death is around the corner, because as I listen to it, it's so eerie that part of me is wondering, is he penned his own, kind of like manifesting, but what you put out there is evidently going to come back to you and inevitably come back to you. And part of me understands where he's coming from like a chip on his shoulder and like wrongfully convicted. But there's an element of him putting these words on paper and going with the Machiavelli moniker and just owning it, that there's something for me, I can't disassociate that from kind of willing it to some degree.
And that's a big difference between Kanye and Pac, right? Like Pac was very fatalistic. Will I be alive till I'm 25? And his worldview was shaped by obviously his mom. He's a Shakur. He's a Black Panther. He understands what happens to powerful Black men who have influence over the Black people. Okay. Black people who are leading Black people get killed. Okay. I don't care if it's Martin Luther King. I don't care if it's Malcolm X. We got to take them out, right? That's what the FBI was doing. Kanye he's always had the opposite of that. He's never sounded fatalistic. Now, you can argue whether or not both of their manifestations are powerful, because I think Kanye is one of the most powerful manifesting people I've ever seen. He has literally manifested everything I've heard him rap about or in an interview talk about over the course of his career. And so has Tupac. Tupac manifested, will I be alive when I'm 25, And so I think the perspective they had from each of them, from where how they were raised and the influences they had, because they're very similar. Pac's family was also, they're activists. His dad was an activist journalist. I don't know if his mom's a Black Panther, but I know she was part of the civil rights movement. She was an educator on these topics in Chicago. They're very similar. It's just what do you take from that and what do you manifest? And I think both of them are products of the same community and, obviously had two very different outcomes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there was no other reference point for Pac. So for Pac, when he faces, being shot and seeing the scrutiny and seeing the climate of the time within music, but also within real life, like it's like Pac was like, it's inevitable that I'm not going to make it for a long time. So I need to then put as much out as possible. Whereas for Ye, it was most almost like, when he faced his near-death experience, he then realized, oh my gosh, like death is coming. It may come in 50, 60 years, but that's so small into the grand scheme of things. And I want to be the greatest of all time. And so I had to put as much out now as possible, because my 80 years is just this. It's a blimp, right? It's a real quick kind of moment in time. And so they both like wrestle with the amount of time they had to do what they want to do. Pac's timeline was shorter because he was literally near death and literally was like, this is not going to be a one-time thing. It felt like it was just the environment and the way that he's speaking. There's no way to avoid that, because to your point, Justin, like the idea of the Black male leader being killed is not just an idea. It's a reality.
Right.
And it's a reality that still gets to this day Black men face in America. And so Pac had that perspective that drove his urgency at all times. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
I will say though, like my complaint, like I'm sure like Justin will help contextualize this. Like not everyone who's like confused about Tupac has like Justin Hunte here to like contextualize everything. But like my thing is like, well, if he knew he was gonna go like really soon, why is this like what he put out? You know, like as like what, you know, like
Well, because a lot of times, oh, my bad, I didn't mean to cut you off.
yeah. Because like, yeah, like before this is about like thug life. I learned was like the idea of like reuniting the gang. It wasn't like about crime. It was about like hustlers and like, you know, flipping a bad situation and like black power. It was about that. Like, and then all over this album, you have to really squint to like get that read from whenever he's talking about being a thug, being a gangster, all that stuff. So like, yeah, what would you say to that?
Well, one of my favorite Lauryn Hill lyrics ever is, and even after all my logic and my theories, I add a motherfucker so you ignorant niggas hear me. Right. And sometimes you're talking to.
Oh my God, that's so good. That's so good.
Sometimes you're talking, you know, to a community or for a community or with only that community in mind. Right. And in that regard, this album resonates a lot differently than, you know, maybe someone who's a music critic, you know, or someone who is thinking about this in connection to, you know, his catalog or other songs that are coming out. You know, like there's cautionary tales all up and down this project. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, you know, you might not necessarily get a, you know, and this is how we get past all the bullshit, you know, as a community. You might not get that, but you're definitely getting like, you know, life goes on. You know, you're definitely getting, gotta be careful gotta be careful, can't let the evils of the money trap me. So when you see me, nigga, you better holler at me. You know, you're getting it in a different kind of way. So in that regard, I think it's really effective. It's just that he also don't got time to be playing with nobody no more because he's been sitting down for 18 months and he was just shot before that. And those dudes been outside running around making money. Okay. He had to make sure he got this out. You know, I can't even really speak to that perspective. You know what I mean? Like, I've definitely in my, I can't speak to that perspective from a fatalistic standpoint. You know what I mean? I definitely looked at it. The closest I've come to that in a professional standpoint, I'd say, is when I left the investment bank, I had enough money saved. I had a 5-year budget with the money that I made and saved to figure out how to write about rap music. I looked up after 3 years. I'm like, I'm not going to make it. Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm like, I got like 5 months left before this becomes a problem. And so, you know, I was like, okay, well, what does this look like if I just can't afford to do this full time anymore? I'm like, well, I guess I go back to the bank. And I'm like, I can't do that. I won't be active. I won't be present. Like, that job will take up way too much of my time and energy. That's why I had to leave in the first place. And I was like, all right, well, I guess I move home with my parents. What does that look like? And it's like, okay, well, you know, I guess I could just work in the family business. And I know editors now. I can still blog, so I can write from anywhere. I can do news stories and editorials and do interviews on the phone. And I got a couple of fraternity brothers. They have clubs in the venue, and I know some artists. So like I can book, hey, I can still make this work. I can still make this work, actually. You know what I'm saying? I don't have to be at this address, right? And so, but over the course of the time when I left the bank and when I was trying to see what could happen, you know, trying to figure out how to get paid writing about a product people don't buy, right? Is like the level of focus and prolificness that I did over those 3-year period vastly superseded anything I'd ever proven I could accomplish before in my life. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care if it was a semester where I got straight A's with all the hardest AP classes. I was not nearly as focused as that period of time because I felt like if I didn't really give this everything, I was going to get nothing. And then now that's like a foolish decision. So I can understand that. That's the closest I've gotten to feeling that way. You know, and even then, that doesn't have some broader implication on whether I'm gonna be alive or my parents are gonna have to bury their child. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know, so I can get close to commiserating without nearly the same amount of consequences around it. You know what I mean?
To wrap this, like we gotta like move on to some songs in a little bit, like some highlight songs. Like this is fantastic shit. But like this, to me, this is the most interesting part of like the conversation, honestly. But like the other thing, like to like kind of is like he already did it. He already said all the he said in an interview, like, my job I might not change the world, but my job is like to plant the seed so that someone else will change the world, like if I don't get to do it.
Right.
And so I think there's like there's an element of having the most number of songs written in a short period of time, having a #1 album, so that like someone who likes Ambition as a Rider can go
Love
back,
it.
like, what's this about? And then like kind of like discover like get radicalized in a different way and like kind of like just like some guy who loves rap, just some guy who like likes to drive in his car around and like, oh shit, this is really I think that's part of it. It's like that's
actually the first song he made for this album. Yeah, his first song they recorded. Daz Dillinger produced it.
Yeah, he's the rose that grew out of the concrete. He's also like the seed that like is planted in the cracks in the concrete also, like that had to like be sacrificed in a way, which is really sad. I think he knew that too. Like I think he was looking at all, I don't know, first of all, but like I think he was like looking at the decisions that led to this point and like the choices he has now, and he's seeing like, I'm reaching the end of the video game in a way.
Well, yeah, I'd also think he was probably conditioned to view the world that way. You know, he's a Shakur, you know, that's a prominent name in the Black Panther community, you know.
Yeah, let's take a quick break and get to some highlight songs and lowlight songs. Click.